Hi, my name is Joan, and I grew up in a family that from the outside could have been seen as the embodiment of well-being and stability. My father was at the helm of an investment company, a heavyweight legacy passed down to him from my grandfather. It wasn't just a firm, it was a family heirloom, a business he lived and breathed for and was incredibly proud of. He often said, with a particular pathos known only to him, that he would one day pass this empire on to his children, thus ensuring the continuity of the dynasty. I have an older sister, Lauren, who is 3 years ahead of me in life's journey, and from the earliest watercolor years of childhood, it was an immutable truth that Lauren was the sun, around which all the planetary aspirations of our parents revolved. She was the golden child, whose actions were beyond criticism, whose existence was a model of perfection, while I remained in the role of an extra, forever somewhere on the periphery of her radiance. When Lauren graduated from college with honors, my father, without delay, installed her in the CEO's chair. This was no surprise to me. In the world picture painted for our family, she always got everything, by right of primogeniture and undisputed favor. A few years later, after receiving my own diploma, I myself crossed the threshold of the company, not as an heiress, but in the modest role of a junior manager, simply one of many cogs in a well-oiled machine. I immersed myself in work with fanatical determination, squeezing myself dry over boring, monotonous reports and countless client meetings, trying to prove that I was worth something. A year of such drudgery was hard on me, but it breathed the ghost of hope into me, and, mustering my courage, I entered my father's office to ask for a promotion. "You need to work harder, Joan," he said, without even granting me a glance, buried in the papers on his desk. "Show me that you truly deserve it." "I'm already squeezing out 60 hours a week," I muttered to myself. "But all right, I'll work even harder." Months later, a family meeting was held at our office. It was one of those quarterly strategy sessions where my father, presiding at the head of the table with the air of a monarch, deigned to listen to the ideas of his subjects. For me, this was my moment to shine, an opportunity to demonstrate that I could think big and bold. "Dad, I have an investment proposal," I began, feeling my heart beat faster. "I believe we should allocate some capital to the cryptocurrency sphere, specifically Bitcoin. It's a new digital currency, but the technology behind it, blockchain, is extremely reliable. I'm confident it has colossal potential and could become incredibly popular." This was many years ago, when Bitcoin was just timidly stepping onto the financial stage, and for the vast majority, its name meant nothing. Lauren immediately let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Are you serious? That's a complete scam, Joan. We'll lose every penny we invest." "It's not a scam," I retorted, trying to maintain my composure. "Yes, it's risky, but sometimes real success is built on calculated risk. Everything we do here is overly conservative. We're not looking to the future at all, not engaging with innovation." My father leaned back in his leather chair, and his gaze, fixed on me, expressed such bewilderment and condescension, as if I had suggested investing in magic beans. "Joan, you are such a dreamer," he said in an icy tone. "It's high time you came down to earth. Your idea is absurd. Our clients pay us for stability, not for your wild, ill-considered experiments." "But Dad, it's not even a proposal," Lauren interjected sarcastically. "It's just awkward. Dad, you should fire her. She's clearly not cut out for this business." I felt a burning blush of shame and resentment spread across my cheeks. "Lauren, that's not fair. I'm only trying to help the company stay afloat, to be competitive in a changing world." "Lauren is right," my father concluded sharply. "This idea is foolish. She's fired. I'll pay her severance, but on the condition that she leaves here immediately." I stared at him in stunned disbelief, not trusting my own ears. "What?" I managed to exhale. "And don't you dare pay her a bonus," Lauren added, with indescribable glee. "She hasn't done anything useful for this company anyway." My gaze, searching for salvation, darted to my mother, who was sitting silently at the other end of the table. She had always been the peacemaker in our family, a quiet harbor. Surely now she would stand up for me, say a word in my defense. But my mother only nodded quietly, almost imperceptibly, agreeing with Lauren. "I think it's for the best, dear," she said lifelessly. I couldn't believe what was happening. My own father was throwing me out in front of the whole family, and no one, absolutely no one, raised a voice in my defense. "Fine," I said, rising from my seat. "I'll leave." My father paid me a severance of $100,000. By most measures, it was generous, but I had not the slightest doubt that he was actually paying me for my silence, for me to quietly and tracelessly disappear, leaving no memories behind. Well, that's exactly what I did. I gathered my few belongings from my rented apartment, said goodbye to the rare friends I had managed to find in the city, and moved to another state, far from everything that reminded me of the past. I desperately needed to start with a clean slate, a place where the shadow of my family name and its reputation wouldn't hang over my every step. In the new city, I found a job at a local investment firm. It couldn't compare in glamour or weight to my father's empire, but here my hard-working nature and perseverance were valued, not my lineage. With part of that severance pay, I made a down payment on a modest but my own apartment, and with the remaining money, driven by both resentment and cold confidence, I invested in exactly what my father had deemed absurd: cryptocurrency, focusing on Bitcoin. My family undoubtedly considered me a foolish and reckless dreamer. Perhaps in some ways they were right. But unlike them, I didn't blindly reject the new. I conducted my own deep research and believed in the very essence of the technology, in its revolutionary potential. The first year brought nothing remarkable. The numbers on the screen lived their own unpredictable life, sometimes rising, evoking a ghost of hope, then crashing down. I didn't panic, holding on to my investments and focusing entirely on my career. I worked with such zeal that I soon received a promotion to senior analyst, brick by brick, building a real professional future of my own. But a few years later, the world turned upside down. The price of Bitcoin, long dormant, made a dizzying, stunning ascent. The funds invested from that very severance began to multiply at an incomprehensible, geometric rate. I watched as my account balance, growing as if on yeast, surpassed the $1 million mark, then 10, and soon 50 million. When I finally decided to cash out some of the assets, my account held a breathtaking sum: $250 million. $250 million. I sat in my modest living room, staring at the flickering screen, unable to comprehend this new reality. I had turned my father's payoff, the payment for my disappearance, into a fortune that at once eclipsed everything his company had earned over many long years. I prudently set aside a significant portion of this money, ensuring my financial security and creating a foundation for future investments. And with the remaining funds, I did what I had secretly dreamed of since the day my father kicked me out of his office. I founded my own investment company, but I swore from the very beginning that it would not be like my father's firm. His business was built on dogma, on conservative caution, on fear of risk, on the grueling repetition of the same thing year after year. I craved a different path. I started investing in the most promising and risky startups, in neural network and artificial intelligence technologies long before they became fashionable. I consciously took calculated risks, supporting companies and ideas that traditional investors, with their blinkered views, simply ignored. I also refused to use my real name, wanting the success of my venture to be independent and in no way associated with the family reputation. Instead, I named the company after my dog, a pedigreed aloof with a long, fancy pedigree name, whom I always simply called Mr. Downtown. And so the name, Downtown Capital, was born. For the next 7 years, I dedicated myself to turning my company into something meaningful and real. Our portfolio was bolstered by several high-profile successes. Startups we believed in early on became world-famous giants. Our strategic investments in artificial intelligence paid off many times over. We were talked about in leading financial magazines, consistently appearing in prestigious Forbes rankings. And all this time, I never once contacted my family. Not at Christmas, not on birthdays, absolutely never. They had made it clear that I was an outcast in their world, and well, I had built my own. 12 long years after my escape, I was sitting in my spacious corner office, contemplating a new project, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Joan," he said, "you might be interested to hear the news about your father's company." For years, I had consciously avoided following my family's affairs, having erased that chapter from my life. But that day, an unknown impulse made me take the folder my assistant handed me. Inside was a financial report. The dry columns of numbers painted a bleak picture. My father's company, once a thriving empire, was teetering on the verge of complete bankruptcy. He was actively seeking buyers, desperately trying to save what was left. One might think I should have felt bitter satisfaction, schadenfreude. After all, they had so cruelly mocked my ideas and thrown me out. But instead, I felt only a cold, analytical curiosity. What had gone wrong? What was their fatal mistake? "Have our lawyers look into this more deeply," I instructed my assistant. "I need a comprehensive, detailed financial analysis of that company." A week later, I was studying a voluminous dossier dedicated to my father's firm. The picture emerging from the documents was truly grim. The company had been steadily losing money for 3 consecutive years. My father, true to his principles to the point of stubbornness, continued to adhere to the same conservative, stale investment strategies as decades ago, flatly refusing to adapt to the rapidly changing market. While his competitors boldly explored new horizons, cryptocurrencies, and venture investments in startups, he clung with manic persistence to traditional bonds and supposedly safe stocks. The world had moved far ahead while he remained in the past, in his frozen world. Lauren was still listed as CEO, but as far as I could tell from public sources, she was hardly ever in the office. Her social media profiles were filled with photos from fashionable resorts, the decks of luxury yachts, and designer boutiques. It seemed she and her husband spent far more time at social events than at their desks. The company, once the pride and symbol of our family, was slowly but surely dying, and apparently no one knew how to stop this agony. I called my lead corporate lawyer into my office. "I want to buy that company," I declared without preamble. "Start negotiations immediately." He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Miss Joan, with all due respect, this acquisition holds no objective value. The company is in deep crisis, and I see no strategic prospects for significant profit." "It's not about profit," I cut him off. "It's personal." The lawyer nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "All right, I'll start the preparatory process." 2 days later, he returned with preliminary estimates. The company is worth, at best, $5 million. Given their catastrophic situation, we can probably drive the price down to 3.5. "Pay them all 5, I ordered. No haggling. Offer the maximum price. Over the next month, my legal team meticulously worked out all the details of the deal. The contract signing was scheduled for early January, right after the New Year holidays. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in 10 long years, I decided to visit my family. I was, of course, not invited. They probably didn't even know how to contact me. But I, with a sharp, almost detective-like curiosity, wanted to see their faces, to witness the moment they realized who was behind the anonymous purchase offer. I flew to my hometown on Christmas Eve and checked into an expensive hotel. The next morning, I headed to my parents' family estate, that same huge, cold house from my childhood. I pressed the doorbell and waited. My mother opened the door, and her jaw literally dropped in astonishment. "Joan, is it really you?" "Hi, Mom. Merry Christmas." I walked past her easily into the painfully familiar foyer. Little had changed here. The same ornate, expensive furniture, the same bland paintings on the walls. The only new element was Lauren, who was here with her husband, some man I didn't know. Lauren rose sharply from the dining table where everyone was having breakfast. "What are you doing here? Why did you come?" "I came to see the family for Christmas," I retorted with icy calm. "Is that forbidden?" "You've probably heard that Dad sold the company," Lauren said with a sneering, venomous smile, full of triumph. "Let me guess. You came to beg for your share. Well, don't hold your breath. You won't get a cent from us." My father rose importantly from his chair, puffing out his chest, as he always did when he wanted to emphasize his significance. That's right. I'm selling the company in just a few days, and believe me, it's a very profitable deal. Really? I asked softly, feeling a smile playing on my lips. And what is the buyer's name? Downtown Capital Investment, Lauren blurted out smugly, her eyes flashing. I don't think that name means anything to you. I couldn't help but laugh. A quiet, velvety laugh that sounded particularly provocative in the tense living room. Downtown Capital Investment is my company. I am its founder and CEO. A tomb-like, deafening silence fell upon the room. You could hear a pin drop. This isn't funny, Lauren finally hissed, her face contorted with anger. Stop these stupid jokes. Without a word, I opened my bag, retrieved a concise, strict business card, and handed it to my father. My name was embossed on the thick cardstock in elegant silver letters next to the company logo. My father turned crimson, his fingers clutching the card so hard it crumpled. You did this. On purpose, he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. You're trying to get revenge on your own family. You want to humiliate me? Actually, I'm merely trying to buy an unprofitable company at a fair, even inflated price. I'm canceling the deal, he roared, throwing the card aside. I won't sell anything to you. I reached into my bag again, this time pulling out a neat stack of legal documents and placing it on the polished surface of the table. The deal was agreed upon several weeks ago. We signed a binding preliminary agreement. If you back out now, you face serious financial penalties for breaching the contract. You're trying to cheat your own father, he yelled, shaking with impotence. I won't give up my company for such a pittance. Dad, the real market value of your business is $3.5 million. I'm paying you $5 million solely because it's the family company. You're getting more than it's actually worth. That's impossible, Lauren shrieked. You don't have that kind of money. This is some kind of scam. I have enough money. My company's assets are valued at $250 million. I could buy a dozen firms like yours without batting an eye. We consistently feature in Forbes rankings. Your own lawyers have been vetting the legality of this deal for a month and found no flaws. No one uttered a word. Mom had turned pale as a sheet. Father, heavily, as if under an unbearable weight, sank into his chair. Lauren's husband looked at me with frank, undisguised astonishment, his mouth agape. You have a few days to think it over, I said calmly, almost detachedly. But remember the penalty clauses for breaching the signed agreement and how such a scandal would affect your already shaken reputation in the business community. I turned around and left the room, leaving them in complete, shocked silence. Over the next few days, my phone was blowing up with messages. My parents were begging for a meeting to discuss everything. Lauren sent a lengthy letter proposing that instead of a full sale, I simply invest $5 million for 40% of the shares. I responded briefly and unequivocally, not interested. I am only buying 100% of the shares. The day of the official contract signing arrived. My father signed each document with a grim, openly displeased expression, his hand moving sharply, with force. Lauren stood nearby, not taking her intense, hate-filled gaze off me. After the last signature was placed, she decisively approached me. I would like to remain with the company, in my current position. The board of directors meeting is tomorrow, I coldly parried. We will be discussing your further status in the company. The next day, I entered the familiar boardroom, which now belonged to me. Seated around the long, polished table were people my father had worked with for many years. Lauren had positioned herself at the far end, trying to mask her face with an expression of confidence. My parents were also present, watching nervously from the sidelines. I asked my assistant to set up the projector, and a bright beam lit up in the room, illuminating a large screen from the semi-darkness. I showed a presentation I had carefully prepared the previous evening, pouring into each slide not only numbers, but also a bitter understanding of the past. Good morning, I began, and my voice, even and cold, sounded in the tense silence. As the new owner of this company, I have conducted a thorough, I would say meticulous, analysis of all our activities. And today, I want to discuss the performance of our current CEO. I moved to the first slide, which featured a clear diagram. This chart clearly demonstrates the dynamics of travel expenses over the past 3 years. Lauren, your spending in this category has steadily grown by 40% annually. Lauren, sitting with a stony face, sharply retorted, "I had important business meetings." These expenses, I continued, ignoring her remark, include first-class flights to Paris, Monaco, and the Caribbean islands, as well as stays in luxury suites at 5-star resorts. I clicked the presenter, and a new page with a long list appeared on the screen. And this expense item, I pointed to specific entries, includes payment for your entire vacation wardrobe at the company's expense. Designer clothes, shoes, bags, all paid for from company funds that should have been working towards development. Lauren's face turned crimson. It was all necessary for business purposes. And this, I switched to another even more telling slide, services of a personal cosmetologist, spa treatments, personal shopping consultants. According to reports, all these expenses were categorized under Professional Development Program. Lauren, the sum of your personal expenses, shamelessly charged to this company, amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars, I concluded. The board members, people who had worked with my father for years, looked at the shocking numbers with growing astonishment. Obviously, none of them had seen such a frank and merciless breakdown before. Based on the above, I propose the immediate dismissal of Lauren from the position of CEO, I declared, looking around at those gathered. All in favor? One of the eldest board members, a man with graying temples, slowly raised his hand. Following him, as if on command, all the others raised their hands, including my parents, who, without looking at each other, also raised their hands, not daring to vote against. Lauren jumped up so sharply that her chair crashed backwards. "This is a setup," she shouted, her voice rising to a screech. "You orchestrated all this to humiliate me." "I plan to conduct an equally thorough review of the work of all executives," I replied coldly. "The numbers, as you can see, speak for themselves." "I hate you," she screamed, and tears of fury stood in her eyes. "You're doing this out of envy." With these words, she ran out of the hall, slamming the heavy door with force. My parents immediately stood up to follow her, but my father, already at the exit, turned and threw me a look full of rage and reproach. "You deliberately shamed your sister in front of everyone. You just wanted revenge." "She got what she deserved," I replied, with absolute calm. "She systematically misappropriated company funds for personal purposes. In legal terms, that's called fraud." They silently walked out, leaving me in the hall. Over the next few weeks, I completely restructured the company. I hired a new, young, and hungry management team, radically updated the outdated investment strategies, and made the company a branch of Downtown Capital. Within just 3 months, we were profitable again for the first time in many years. My parents continued trying to make contact. Endless texts, calls, even old-fashioned letters. I ignored most of them, but eventually, out of curiosity or fatigue, agreed to meet them for coffee. They looked aged, faded. My father especially, his gaze was tired and broken. "We need to talk about the money," my father began without preamble. Barely had we sat down. "We gave half of the amount you paid us to Lauren. We thought it would be fair, after all the years she gave to the company." "Okay," I said, expecting him to continue, "but I gather there's a problem?" "Lauren's husband has a gambling addiction. He lost most of their share, paying off debts, and Lauren spent almost all the remaining money to cover his new losses." I slowly took a sip of hot coffee, maintaining an impassive silence. "And I myself have remaining debts," my father forced out with difficulty, looking at the table. "Business loans I took out to somehow keep the company afloat in recent years." I listened to them without saying a word, letting my father finish his painful explanation. "We had to spend most of the remaining money from the sale to pay off these debts," he concluded, and a helplessness I had never heard before sounded in his voice. "So you are effectively bankrupt," I stated without emotion. "We have some funds left," my mother interjected hastily, as if afraid of my condemnation, "but they are completely insufficient to maintain our previous lifestyle. We can no longer afford the estate. We will have to move into something more modest. Sounds like the only reasonable solution in your situation, I remarked, pushing the coffee cup aside. My father flushed, and the veins on his neck bulged. And that's all you have to say? We are your parents. And you fired me and called me foolish, I retorted, looking straight at him. You mocked my ideas and threw me out of the family business when I was trying to save it. And now you come to me because you need my help? We made mistakes, my mother said quietly, almost in a whisper. We apologize. If you are truly in financial difficulty, I said, maintaining a businesslike tone, sell the estate and buy a more modest house. Take the remaining money and I will help you invest it properly. I am not going to simply give you money. I will help you wisely invest what you have left so you have a stable income in retirement. My father rose sharply from his chair. We don't need your investment advice. We need real, material help, and you refuse to provide it. I am offering you exactly what I would offer any other client in a similar position, I replied coldly. If that's not enough for you, well, that's your choice. They left, full of anger and resentment, and for the next few months, I heard nothing from them. Until one day, my lawyer called. Your parents have contacted our office, Miss Joan. They want to invest the remaining $500,000 in one of your funds. Open a standard client account for them, I instructed immediately, under the same terms as for all other investors. Are you sure? They are your parents, he gently clarified. That is precisely why they should be treated the same as everyone else. No special favors. The investment account was opened, and I placed their funds in a conservative but reliable and diversified portfolio. Over the next year, their investments yielded a 15% return, enough for a comfortable retirement, but with no hint of their former luxury. From mutual acquaintances, I learned that Lauren had finally convinced her husband to undergo rehab for his gambling addiction. They had started family therapy, trying to mend both their marriage and their financial situation. Lauren herself had gotten a permanent job at an ordinary marketing firm, not as a CEO, but as a regular employee, just as I had started out. A part of my heart ached with regret for how things had turned out, but deep down I understood. Lauren finally had to learn to achieve everything through her own labor, not receive it by birthright. As for my parents, they eventually sold the mansion and bought a nice but very modest house in a quiet neighborhood for seniors. They seemed to have come to terms with their new reality, though I had no doubt it was painfully difficult for them at first. One evening, about 6 months after they had invested, my mother called. Joan, I wanted to thank you. Her voice sounded unusually soft. For treating us honestly, not for any special treatment, but precisely for dealing with us the same way you would with anyone else. We didn't deserve even that, after all we did. You're welcome, Mom, I said, feeling an unexpected heaviness in my chest. I know we can never atone for those years when we ignored you and always put Lauren first, she continued, and tears were audible in her voice. But I want you to know, I am proud of you. You were right about everything, in your willingness to take risks, about cryptocurrency, about the need for innovation. We should have listened to you. It was the closest thing to sincere remorse I had ever heard from them. I appreciate your words, Mom. Could you ever come to visit us? She asked timidly. Not on business, just as family. I'll think about it, I replied after a short pause. Perhaps. I'll need to check my schedule. That's all I can ask for, she said quietly. After the conversation with my mother, I sat in my office for a long time, lost in thought, looking at the evening cityscape spread out beyond the panoramic window. I had built an entire empire from the ashes of my own rejection, from the wreckage of the life that was once intended for me. I had proven to everyone who dared to call me a foolish and reckless dreamer that they were wrong. But that victory, which I had so passionately dreamed of all these years, tasted nothing like I had imagined. There was no sweet triumph in it, only a strange, heavy sense of finality, as if I had put a period at the end of a long and exhausting argument. I had taken revenge by achieving success that surpassed their wildest expectations. I had bought my father's company and publicly fired my sister. I had forced my family to admit that I had been right from the very beginning. 2 years had passed since I became the owner of my father's business. Downtown Capital had grown even larger, and that branch, which was once the proud family empire, had become one of our most profitable and dynamic divisions. I completely overhauled their outdated investment strategy, implementing bold and innovative approaches, and as a result, we achieved returns my father couldn't have dreamed of in his best years. Once, while reviewing another quarterly report in my office, I received a message from my assistant. "Your mother is here, wants to see you, no appointment." I hesitated, feeling the familiar tension. Our relationship with my parents had recently boiled down to polite but distant monthly phone calls, during which we discussed only safe topics, the weather or the dry reporting on their investments. "Let her in," I finally instructed. Mom entered the office, looking constrained and somewhat lost. She was wearing simple, unpretentious clothes, strikingly different from the designer outfits she used to wear. "Hello, Joan. Thank you for seeing me without notice." "Is everything all right?" I asked out of politeness. "Is Dad okay?" "He's fine. Actually, we're both doing better. Better than in recent years, largely thanks to the returns on our investments." "Glad to hear it. So what brings you here?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit in the chair opposite. She nervously sat on the edge of the seat. "I wanted to talk to you about Lauren." I felt my shoulders involuntarily tense. "What about her?" "She and her husband have been in therapy for over a year now. He's been clean from gambling for 18 months. Lauren is working at that marketing firm, and she's actually doing quite well." "I'm happy for her," I said neutrally. She wants to talk to you, to apologize properly." "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. I know there's a chasm of resentment between you, but she has really changed, Joan. Now she understands what it means to truly work for something, not just get everything handed to her by birthright." "She called me foolish," I reminded her coldly. "She demanded that Father fire me. She laughed when my ideas were rejected." "I know, and she knows how wrong she was. We all do." I looked into my mother's eyes and saw not the usual submissiveness, but sincere, deep regret. "Why now? So many years have passed." "Because she has finally been able to admit she was wrong, and because life is too short and we've already wasted too much time." I didn't answer immediately, giving myself a pause. A part of me, hardened and wounded, wanted to refuse sharply and slam that door shut forever. But another part, tired of the burden of old anger, was slowly tipping the scales. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." A few weeks later, I agreed to meet Lauren. We arranged to meet on neutral ground in a quiet, cozy cafe halfway between our cities. She looked different than in my memories, less ornate, more natural. No designer items, just simple jeans and a sweater. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as I took a seat opposite. "I treated you terribly," Lauren began, her voice quiet but firm, "and not just on the day Dad fired you, but all the previous years, since childhood. I always felt an invisible threat emanating from you, from your sharp mind and incredible, frightening determination. And so I unconsciously, and sometimes quite consciously, belittled you, trying to elevate myself in my own eyes and in the eyes of our parents, to feel significant. And I acted particularly despicably on the day you proposed investing in cryptocurrency. I knew, Joan, I knew it was actually a brilliant, ahead-of-its-time idea. That's precisely why I rejected it so fiercely and decisively, because I was terrified that Dad would finally see how much more perceptive and smarter you were than me. This admission genuinely surprised me. "You knew?" I asked, feeling the ground shift under my feet. "I had read about Bitcoin. I saw its colossal potential," Lauren continued, not looking away. "But I just couldn't let you be right, because then I would have had to publicly admit that I was no longer the golden girl, the smart one, and that you were. And instead, I got you fired. Yes, and I have regretted it every day, every minute since. But not because you achieved staggering success, although that certainly made me realize the depth of my stupidity with horror, but because, through my fault, I lost my only sister." I slowly stirred my coffee, feeling dozens of conflicting emotions battling inside me and unable to find the right words. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," Lauren continued, and a note of humility sounded in her voice. I just want you to know I am sincerely, painfully sorry. And if you ever, in the future, want to communicate with me again, even just as acquaintances, I would be immensely happy. I need time, I finally exhaled. I understand. We finished our drinks mostly in silence. But this silence was no longer the same, heavy and oppressive, full of unspoken grievances and malice. Now it more resembled a fragile but voluntary truce, the first thin thread stretched across the chasm of years. Over the next year, Lauren and I gradually began to communicate, first with short, cautious messages, then longer phone calls. She told me about her new job, about the progress of therapy, and her husband's successes in battling his addiction. I, in turn, shared news about my business, told her about fresh AI startups I was investing in. These were no longer the carefree sisterly bonds of childhood, and they would never be again. Too many bitter events and resentments lay between us. But it was something, a new, mature form of connection. My parents continued to successfully manage their investments, and they seemed to have finally come to terms with a simpler but calmer lifestyle, even finding some new, genuine happiness in it. My father once, during his rare visit to my office, admitted to me that in the last few years before the sale, he felt terrible running the company as it slowly sank, and he was trying with his last strength to maintain the appearance of former success while everything was literally falling apart in his hands. "You saved me," he said then, and his eyes showed genuine relief. "I know you didn't mean to, but that's what happened. You took that unbearable burden off my shoulders and returned the company to its former success." As for me, my company continued to grow and expand steadily. We made strategic, well-considered investments in the most cutting-edge technologies, in talented, promising entrepreneurs, in bold ideas that conservative investors still considered overly risky. Sometimes we, of course, suffered failures, but much more often we met with resounding, impressive success. I had proven to everyone who ever doubted me that they were wrong. I had built something much larger and more significant than my father's company ever was. I had taken revenge in the most convincing way possible. I had surpassed their wildest dreams. But somewhere along the way, among the endless deals and victories, the very idea of revenge ceased to matter to me. What turned out to be much more important was that I had built a life I could be proud of, and I had done it entirely on my own terms. My family and I would, of course, never be as close as in some families. Too much pain had been caused for that. But we found a way to coexist, building honest, if not very warm, relationships. Lauren still sometimes withdrew, didn't get in touch for months, but when she did call or write, there wasn't a drop of pretense or former manipulativeness in her words, only sincerity. And you know what? For me, that was quite enough. I no longer needed my family's approval. I no longer needed them to acknowledge that I was right, even though they ultimately did.